I'm Jake Williams, Associate Publisher of StateScoop, and we're here with Sajed Naseem, CISO for New Jersey courts. Sajed, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Jake.
So Sajed, there has been a lot thrown at CISOs in 2020. From your perspective, how has 2020 changed the CISO role?
Yeah, I mean, concerning my role, I think previous to 2020, before the pandemic, we had a situation where I'm part of the court system, right? So the court systems, many people walk in, they understand that it's a larger enterprise. There's judges, there's juries, there's attorneys, there's law enforcement, and they walk into a physical building. It's a prolific looking building, and at the end, a trial happens. And that's how, for the last 100 years or so, how court trials have been run. Now, back in March, our court went completely remote, right? Or not completely, but a good majority, 90% went remote, trials went remote, and so on and so forth. That was a major shift from a cybersecurity standpoint and also from a legal standpoint for our courts. So some of the key things I looked at were, how do we deal with new devices that are coming on the network? Because we had staff that were typically on premise, that were inside the court. Now we have to allow them to use devices at home. So our BYOD policy and our networking policies had to shift. And so in addition to that, our threat landscape also shifted, because clearly people were using devices all across the country in case they were stuck somewhere, or they were traveling, or they were at home, giving care to their loved ones. So clearly the threat landscape, the networking, and the security landscape changed.
And so, I mean, you said it yourself. I mean, workforces are so much more distributed than they were just a few months ago. I mean, in this case, now we're talking 6-7 months ago. What has that taught security leaders like yourself, but also security leaders on your team and the ones that you've spoken to? What has that taught them when it comes to implementing security policies for organizations?
Right. And so one of the key things I think that that is affecting a lot of users, back in February or March, there were some threat intelligence reports that were showing that coronavirus related domains and COVID-19 related domains were increasing, the malicious ones, right? There was an actual graphic that showed that about 4,000% of coronavirus domains and COVID related domains were malicious in nature. There was additional threat reports that were speaking to Microsoft related domains, clearly because of the cloud that was implemented. You had lots of Microsoft activities going on, so that was out there. And we definitely saw increasing ransomware attacks. So combined with everything that had already been going on post Equifax breach, post the Atlanta breach, the post Baltimore from previous years, you had this COVID related theme. I saw a number of additional reports which were showing that a lot of these hackers were targeting people from a social engineering standpoint with their town specific information. So you may have gotten a Microsoft Teams meeting that's speaking to your town in South Carolina. So clearly our workforce was under attack, right? And we clearly saw that through the data. And we also saw things related to that with our own workforce. So a lot of our time has been spent trying to provide the necessary training specifically related to phishing and social engineering to our staff.
And both before the pandemic, but also all the way through it, right? Technology has continued to evolve. So Internet of Things and 5G technologies continue to come online. That obviously means more technology is being brought in-house to handle those improvements. With those improvements come supply chain concerns. How should we collectively handle those concerns while still trying to make sure that we don't fall behind?
This is the question of our time. I do believe this is a question of our time. As a security person, you cannot protect something you cannot see, right? So it's simple as that. That's the fundamental. That's the baseline of, if you're making a building of bricks, that's the brick, right? And that is, believe it or not, if you look at NIST cybersecurity framework and or other standards, knowing where all your devices are is step number one. And this is, believe it or not, the major thing that organizations do struggle with, right? To know where everything is. So we had already taken some steps to know exactly where everything was, okay? From a visibility standpoint, right? So we know where all of our stuff is. So once we know all of our stuff is, then we can identify which stuff comes on the network, what time, if there's any policies around that. And this can be implemented through some networking security technologies like network access control and things along those lines. So visibility is step number one. And then what you do is then you classify different devices into their proper buckets, basically, right? So you have Windows devices, let's say, or Linux, or IoT, or Cisco's, whatever you have, you define them, and then you make consistent policy of how to utilize each of those devices. What are the rules behind if whether or not an IoT device is allowed on the network, which network is it allowed to communicate with, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, and I think a key item that sort of underlies everything that we've talking about so far is the workforce. And as cyber threats continue to grow in sophistication, organizations face that persistent challenge to recruit skilled cybersecurity professionals that are capable of protecting these systems against the threat of malicious actors, those malicious actors that we talked about a little bit earlier. How do we close the gaps that exist in the nation's current cybersecurity education and training landscape?
Yeah, I mean, this is an excellent question here, and this is also very much linked to our cybersecurity. So without knowing where all your devices are, you can't protect it, right? Without having the proper staff to look at the policies, to look for any gaps, to be resilient and persistent in following different threats is key. We saw a number of years back where what had happened is the attacks that we saw on Marriott Hotel and Starwood's Hotel. We noticed that one of the cybersecurity engineers saw the alert and thought it was a false positive, right? And then let it through. And then we heard about the big compromise back in, I believe, 2019 now, or 18. And we saw that. And so it's important that our staff are cleared, understand what the different threats are. So how do you now recruit staff that are going to do that? And I think part of that, actually, believe it or not, during COVID, because we have a New Jersey requirement that you must be staying in New Jersey, once you are, employed by the state of New Jersey. Now, New Jersey is a big state. So one of the things we were able to do is recruit through the universities. And since we're remote, they were able to live at different, in New Jersey, but further apart since they're not coming to the office. So we've used some of that to recruit the proper talent. But I think one of the key things to look in talent is the ability to communicate, the ability to be persistent, and the ability to be and not give up, right? Because some of these things are unclear and you have to follow through. And we've actually recruited several staff that even some of them have not come from cybersecurity backgrounds, but have the analytical skills and the communication skills to be able to look through problems and follow through on them.
That's cool. And, obviously our workforce is changing, our technology is changing, our world is changing. Sajed, I look forward to talking about more this and more in the future. Thanks for being here today.
I appreciate it, Jake. Thank you very much.